A $5 product should not be able to cross the world and still arrive at your door with free shipping. But for years, one customs rule helped make that possible. It was called de minimis. And under this rule, low-value packages under $800 could enter the United States with fewer duties and less friction. To shoppers, it looked like magic. A $2 phone case, a $5 shirt, a kitchen gadget cheaper than lunch. But behind those prices was a global machine. Factories, platforms, shipping routes, customs rules, warehouses, and millions of tiny packages moving one by one across borders. Temu and Shein did not just sell cheap product, they helped turn a little-known shipping rule into a business advantage. And when that rule started changing, the question became simple. Can ultra-cheap shopping survive without the loophole that helped build it? Because millions of small packages could move directly from overseas factories to American homes without the traditional retail structure. No large wholesale orders, no store shelves, no long chain of middlemen, just factory, platform, package, customer. That was the magic, and also the controversy. Temu and Shein did not simply sell cheap products, they popularized a different model of shopping. Thousands of sellers reaching consumers directly, prices that seemed unbelievably low, products moving across the world one parcel at a time. Underneath the apps was a logistics machine. That is the business story, not whether a $5 shirt is good or bad, but how a little-known customs rule helped reshape global commerce. For decades, retail worked in a familiar way. Products were shipped in bulk, moved through ports, stored in warehouses, and eventually reached stores or fulfillment centers. Every step added costs, import duties, labor, inventory risk, warehousing, retail margins. The system was expensive but predictable. Temu and Shein pushed another approach. Instead of bulk shipments, they relied heavily on direct-to-consumer parcels. Algorithms decided what shoppers saw. Factories responded to demand faster. Products could be tested online before huge inventory commitments. The result was price shock. Consumers were not just seeing discounts, they were seeing prices that made them question the entire retail system. How can this be so cheap? Who pays for shipping? Who is making money? The app sold the feeling of beating the system, but when something looks impossibly cheap, the cost rarely disappears. It simply moves somewhere else. Maybe to sellers, maybe to factories, maybe to logistics networks, maybe to future prices when the rules change. That is where this story becomes bigger than shopping, because the $800 loophole became part of a larger debate over trade, tariffs, labor, and competition. And when the rule began changing, the business model had to change too. The basic idea behind minimis was simple. Low-value shipments received lighter customs treatment. The goal was efficiency. Processing tiny shipments was often more expensive than the value of the goods themselves. That logic worked in an older world. But e-commerce changed the scale. One package under $800 is small. Millions are not. That is the loophole. Not one order, scale. Traditional retailers importing goods in bulk faced duties, compliance costs, warehouses, and inventory risk. Cross-border sellers shipping small parcels operated under a different cost structure. Consumers saw cheap products. Competitors saw an imbalance. Governments saw pressure. Platforms saw growth. For Shein, the model proved especially powerful in fashion. Fashion trends change quickly. Traditional retailers make large bets months in advance. If trends disappear, inventory remains unsold. Shein focused on speed. It tested products, tracked demand, and quickly expanded successful designs. Instead of relying on seasonal collections, it constantly fed consumers new items. More products created more browsing. More browsing created more data, and more data improved recommendations. Temu used a different strategy. Extreme discounts, heavy advertising, gamified shopping, coupons, rewards, timers, and free shipping. The message was simple. Everything is cheap. Shopping became a treasure hunt. Psychology became part of the business model. People hesitate before buying a $50 product, but a $3 product feels almost risk-free. The emotional barrier becomes smaller. One cheap item becomes 5, and millions of small purchases create enormous platforms. This principle powers many digital businesses. Reduce friction, lower decision costs, make the next click easy, turn attention into transactions. But unlike social media or streaming services, Temu and Shein move physical goods. The front end feels digital, the back end is physical, and physical systems have limits. As package volume increased, pressure increased. Retailers complained. Lawmakers raised concerns. Consumer groups questioned quality. Environmental critics highlighted waste. Customs systems faced growing strain. Eventually, the rule itself became a political target, because once a loophole becomes large enough to reshape an industry, it stops being invisible. Governments started asking a simple question: was de minimis still a convenience rule, or had it become a business model? That question changed everything. Billions of dollars in goods were entering through low-value shipments. Questions emerged about tariffs, product safety, counterfeit goods, forced labor, and fair competition. Temu and Shein became symbols of a much larger issue. Not just cheap shopping, the future of global trade. And when the United States moved to restrict de minimis treatment for many packages connected to China and Hong Kong, the model entered a new phase. Demand still existed, the product still existed, but the old shipping advantage became less straightforward. Companies had to adapt, and adaptation is already happening. More inventory is moving into local warehouses. Domestic fulfillment is becoming more important. Shipping strategies are changing. Advertising strategies are changing. Prices may change. Delivery expectations may change. The real test is whether these companies can succeed without relying on the same loophole. Because a company that survives after the loophole closes is stronger than one that only benefited from it. If Temu and Shein can maintain low prices, improve compliance, and keep customers loyal, they become durable global retailers. If they cannot, then part of their success may have depended on rules that are disappearing. That is why investors, regulators, competitors, and consumers are watching closely. The business question is no longer simply how cheap can they sell. The question is, can they stay cheap when the rules change? That is much harder because cheap prices are not magic. Every business has costs. The only difference is where those costs are hidden. For shoppers, the end of the loophole could mean higher prices, longer delivery times, or fewer ultra-cheap deals. For competitors, it could create a more level playing field. For platforms, it means growing up. And for governments, it opens a much larger debate about trade in the age of apps. Because de minimis was designed for a world where small shipments were actually small. Temu and Shein showed what happens when small becomes massive. That is the lesson. The future of retail may not be determined only by brands or influencers. It may be shaped by customs rules, warehouses, shipping thresholds, algorithms, and the invisible economics behind a checkout button. A shopper sees a bargain, a retailer sees a threat, a government sees a loophole, and a supply chain sees millions of tiny packages moving every day. That is why the cheapest products on the internet were never just cheap. They were the result of a system built on speed, data, factories, shipping, policy, and psychology. The product on your screen may look small, but behind it is a global machine. And for years, that machine had a powerful advantage. A rule that allowed low-value packages to move differently from the rest of retail. Now that advantage is being challenged, and the companies built around it must answer the question every fast-growing business eventually faces. Was the model strong because customers truly loved it, or because the rules made it easier to win? The answer will shape what happens next, not only for Temu and Shein, but for the future of cheap online shopping. Because the next time something seems too cheap to make sense, it may be worth asking a different question. Not just, how much does this cost, but what system made this price possible?